They called it a routine expert hearing. Just another day on Capitol Hill. Another panel. Another round of questions. No one was expected to really remember it. But this time, something was different. The chamber was unusually full. The press section, packed shoulder to shoulder. Phones were silent. But cameras remained poised, because under the soft lights of the Oversight Committee sat Associate Justice Amy Coney Barrett. She wasn't there to defend a ruling. Not officially. The hearing was titled, Rights, Access, and Accountability, a Constitutional Review. But everyone in the room knew exactly why she had been invited. 2 years earlier, Justice Barrett had authored a minority opinion in a Supreme Court case, one that denied women in several southern states access to emergency medical care related to pregnancy complications. It wasn't the majority ruling, but that opinion had been cited again and again, in hospitals, clinics, and courtrooms across the South. And now, for the very first time, she wasn't facing fellow justices or legal scholars. She was facing elected officials, armed with data, personal stories, and consequences. At the far end of the panel sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, silent still, her eyes fixed, not on Barrett, but on the thick folder resting in her lap. She hadn't spoken once during the first hour. She didn't interrupt. She didn't react. She simply waited. And then, with no change in tone, the committee chair passed her the floor. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, "you now have 5 minutes." Jasmine stood slowly. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. But it carried not by volume, but by precision. "Justice Barrett," she began, "are you familiar with Dove Jackson County Hospital, 2022? The room shifted slightly. Barrett tilted her head carefully. "That was a lower court case, I believe," she replied. Jasmine nodded and tapped a button. Behind her, a screen lit up with a court document, a scanned PDF, dated, signed, real. It was the judgment from Jackson County Hospital. The case involved a young black woman, 29 years old, denied a life-saving procedure. The hospital claimed the legal guidance was unclear. Barrett looked up at the screen. And then Jasmine said, softly but clearly, "They cited your opinion." The room held its breath. Not because anyone shouted, not because anyone accused, but because, in that one exchange, the theory of law had finally met the weight of its real-world consequences. And Jasmine wasn't finished. She turned the page inside her folder, gently. And for the first time that morning, Justice Amy Coney Barrett shifted in her seat. Because what came next would leave the courtroom silent. "Justice Barrett," Jasmine said again, her voice unwavering, "are you familiar with Dove Jackson County Hospital, 2022? Barrett blinked, not surprised. At least not outwardly, but calculating. Her response came with the calm neutrality of someone trained to deliver answers that revealed little and risk even less. "That was a lower court case, I believe." Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't nod for effect. She simply tapped the remote again. The screen behind her lit up. A single-page PDF appeared, complete with court header, docket number, and an official filing stamp. It wasn't dramatized. It didn't need to be. "This," Jasmine said, "is the internal judgment. Sealed 2 weeks ago by a whistleblower from Jackson County's legal team." A pause. The plaintiff, identified as Jane Doe, was 29 years old. She was 15 weeks pregnant. Her fetus had developed a rare condition that made survival impossible. Her own life was now at risk. Doctors recommended an emergency, surgical termination. Jasmine turned slightly toward the screen. The page zoomed in, but the hospital refused. She pointed. In their written denial, they cited a lack of legal clarity following a Supreme Court opinion issued in 2021. Then, calmly, she added, "That opinion was co-authored by you, Justice Barrett." No one moved. The gallery, once fidgeting, in rhythm with the usual pace of a congressional hearing, went still. Jasmine continued, not accusing, just unfolding. The hospital's counsel noted, and I quote, "Given recent federal rulings, including the Supreme Court's 2021 judgment, our institution must exercise extreme caution until legal standing is made more explicit." Barrett remained silent. Jasmine lifted a second document. Another court record. This one was marked confidential. The fetus did not survive. By the time the ethics board granted permission to intervene, Miss Doe had suffered sepsis, internal hemorrhaging, and permanent organ damage. Still, Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't glare. She didn't dramatize. She let the facts breathe. "She's alive," Jasmine said, "but she can't bear children again." And in her lawsuit, she asked just one question. Beat past. Was my life not worth the court's time? Barrett's hands remained folded, still, but her eyes just briefly lowered to the paper in front of her. And that's when Jasmine added, gently, almost as if speaking to the silence itself. This wasn't theory. It wasn't jurisprudence. It was a Tuesday. In a real hospital, with real consequences. And someone pointed to your words. No answer came. None was expected. Because Jasmine hadn't come to argue a legal point. She had come to make it human. She turned back to the screen. No more PDFs. No more filings. No more legal jargon. Just numbers. A new slide appeared. Simple white letters on a black background. Maternal mortality by race. Post 2, 2021. 3 columns. 2 bars. 1 truth. Jasmine didn't rush. She let the silence settle. She gave the room time to look. To my colleagues, she said quietly, this is CDC-confirmed national data, compiled independently of any political entity. She gestured to the first column, white women. A 3% increase in maternal mortality rates since 2021. Then to the second, women of color, a 34% increase. And then she let that land hard. When she spoke again, it wasn't to dramatize, it was to clarify. That's not a typo, not a projection. It's real data. From real deaths in Mississippi, in Alabama, in rural Georgia. From IRFs that turned away patients because of legal confusion. From hospitals that feared lawsuits more than they feared losing lives. The screen didn't flash. It didn't animate. It just sat there, still and damning. Then Jasmine looked forward. Her tone didn't change, but something in her presence did. Judicial theory, she said, is not neutral when it costs lives. It wasn't loud, but it echoed. It moved through the room differently, the way truth does when stripped of performance. She wasn't just addressing Justice Barrett anymore. She was speaking to power itself. Behind her, the data remained. The numbers didn't blink, and Justice Barrett sat still, professional, composed, expression contained. But she didn't speak. Because when the numbers take the floor, even legal theory knows when it's out of time. Jasmine let the silence breathe. She gave it space. Then, just as the room thought they understood where she was headed, she shifted, not aimlessly, not dramatically, but with purpose. Justice Barrett, she said, let's move briefly away from healthcare and toward democracy. Barrett looked up again, just slightly. Jasmine continued. In Shelby County v. Holder, this court weakened federal voting protections. You weren't yet on the bench then, Jasmine said. But you've since spoken in agreement with the reasoning behind it. She paused. So I'd like to ask you something. A beat. Can you tell us how many polling stations have closed in the U.S. since that decision? The room waited. Barrett didn't answer. Not yet. Not at all. So Jasmine turned back to the screen. 1 click. A new slide appeared. Large, unblinking numbers stretched across the top. 1,248 polling places closed. The words below, majority, in Black, Latinx, and Indigenous communities. A slow wave moved through the audience. Not a gasp, just the uneasy silence of being shown something you already suspected, but hoped wasn't true. Jasmine spoke plainly. No emotion, just data. After Shelby, jurisdictions no longer needed federal approval to alter polling access. And across Georgia, Texas, Arizona, Alabama, the pattern is consistent. Another line of text faded in beneath the headline. She pointed, average distance to vote, plus 42 miles. 42 miles, she repeated. That's not just a drive. That's a decision. The committee room was still. No rideshare, no paid time off, no public transit, just longer lines and fewer voices. Barrett remained silent. Still, professional, still composed. But her fingers tapped once against her notes. Not nervously, not obviously, just briefly. Jasmine didn't press her. She didn't raise her voice. She turned back toward the room and let the weight sit where it needed to. When we talk about access, she said, we have to ask access for whom, and at what cost. No response came. But the question had already landed. And in that moment, the courtroom stopped being abstract. It became real again. Jasmine stepped away from the screen. No more charts. No more documents. No more names. Just one question. She turned to the panel, not just Justice Barrett, but to everyone in the room, and asked, if rights only exist when courts allow them, are they really rights? A pause then. Softer now, but deeper. Or are they just permissions? Granted, until power decides to take them back. No one moved. Not because they didn't know the answer, but because deep down, they already did. And a few seats over, an older congressman, who hadn't spoken all morning, slowly shook his head. Not at Jasmine, not at Barrett, but at the quiet truth behind the question. The kind of truth that doesn't fit into a press release. Barrett didn't respond. Her posture remained exact. Her face composed. She didn't break. She didn't stumble. But she didn't answer either. Because there was no document she could cite. No legal precedent that could untangle what Jasmine had just asked. And still, Jasmine didn't. Accused, she didn't raise her voice. She simply held the silence, letting the room sit with it. And sometimes silence is louder than anything else. Jasmine turned slightly, then spoke 4 words that shifted the room. "Madam Chair, I yield." The chair nodded. A side door opened, and in stepped a woman, not in a suit, not in heels, but in hospital scrubs. Dark blue, worn, but clean. She walked to the microphone, her hospital badge still clipped to her chest. "My name is Dr. Alina Morris," she began. "I'm an OB-GYN at a regional hospital in Montgomery, Alabama." No one interrupted. No one looked away. "I've delivered over 2,000 babies in my career," she said, "and I've performed life-saving care for mothers in crisis." She glanced briefly toward the witness table. "And last year, I was investigated for performing an emergency abortion to save the life of a woman who was actively hemorrhaging." She paused, then looked directly at Justice Barrett. "I followed the oath of medicine. I followed the science. I followed the screams of a mother whose vitals were crashing in front of me." Her voice didn't crack, but it carried, "And I was punished, not by my hospital, not by the patient's family, but by the interpretation of legal language written by this court." Barrett didn't speak. Dr. Morris continued. "I was told the statute was vague, that I should have waited until her condition was officially life-threatening. A beat. But I ask you this. How do you time a dying breath?" The room didn't move. Then she said it, softly, clearly. "And that language," Dr. Morris said, "came from your pen, Justice Barrett." For the first time all morning, Barrett blinked slowly and looked down at the table in front of her, not defensively, not angrily, just down. Because some truths don't need to be shouted. They just need to be spoken and heard. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't lean in. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked out across the room, across generations, across titles, across parties, and across precedent, and asked one final question. "I'm not asking you," she said, "to change your values." There was no sarcasm in her tone, no accusation, just clarity. "But I am asking." She stepped forward slightly. Her voice slowed, softened, sharpened. "When you write decisions, when you author a language that defines the limits of care, the reach of a right, or the meaning of harm, do you think of the names behind those cases?" She let the question breathe. "Or just the citations?" Justice Barrett didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because in that moment, it wasn't about winning an argument. It was about something deeper. A courtroom filled with lawmakers, clerks, staffers, and press suddenly remembered something. That behind every legal term, there is a living person. Behind every ruling, a real family. Behind every opinion, a beating heart. Hoping that somewhere, someone might see them as more than a footnote. In the back row, Dr. Morris now sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Somewhere in Alabama, Jane Doe was living with the scars of a judgment that never even mentioned her name. And across the country, in polling lines, in hospitals, in courtrooms, in classrooms, the ripple effects of a single pen stroke were still shaping lives that would never be consulted before. The ink dried. Jasmine looked down at her notes, then gently closed the folder. No theatrics, no applause. Just the one thing the system rarely offers: space. To feel. And in that space, she left something behind. A question that refused to fade. What is justice if it forgets the human cost? As the hearing drew to a close, reporters whispered, staffers packed up, cameras clicked off. But something lingered in the air. Not outrage. Not even sadness. Something quieter. Heavier. A kind of accountability that doesn't come from punishment, but from presence. Because Jasmine hadn't come to shame a justice. She came to remind one that the law is not sacred because it's written in marble. It becomes sacred when it remembers the living. And as she stepped out of the chamber, the final words she had spoken remained in the room. And on the record, law shouldn't just be right on paper. It must be right for the people living through it.